progress. Thank you all for coming tonight. This program is hosted by Gem Environmental, and Cassie, their program coordinator, will introduce our speaker tonight.
Thank you, Ruthie. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming in person, and thank you for those who are attending virtually. As Ruthie said, my name is Cassie. I'm the program coordinator with Gem Environmental. We're a local nonprofit, and our mission is to provide unique educational opportunities for students interested in STEM. And we do that through scholarships, internships, and through our Gem Corps Workforce Readiness Program. And all of this is possible through our volunteers. So if you're interested in volunteering, we have opportunities for putting on lectures like these. We have opportunities for phenology monitoring, which is watching for seasonal changes with plants in the area to monitor climate change, and other opportunities, especially depending on what people are interested in, we can try and find opportunities for you. So if that's something you're interested in, please come let us know. You can speak to me or my boss, Eric, in the back over there, or you can reach out to us. We have pamphlets with our contact information in the back. And we also, I just want to put in a quick plug for our charity Racks store, which is a rock shop in town where we sell racks to help fund our programs. We have a website, it's just charityracks.org. And if you wanted to come in and take a look at our racks, you can make an appointment, just reach out to us again. So without further ado, I think we'll get started. Becky Beers is here to give a great presentation. She graduated from NAU in 2020 with a master's degree in geology focused on post-fire geomorphology. Her work has focused on post-fire landscapes across western New Mexico and Arizona, including the museum burn scar. On the museum, Becky has collaborated with multiple agencies to better understand the ever-changing conditions on the burned landscape. So with that said, Becky.
Oh, awesome. All right, how's the sound? Perfect, awesome. So thank you so much for that introduction. And today I'm going to be talking all about the museum fire and the research that myself and others have done out there. And I would like to take a quick second to recognize the other contributors to this work. Pete Robichaud, Ryan Porter, Taylor Joyle, Ann Uberg, Joe Lovrich, Ed Shank, and Sean Untolin.
We have just a second to keep the photos.
Yep. We have a quick pause. All right, we're back on. So a really quick overview of the museum fire. I'm pretty sure everybody's heard about it in the news by now, but it ignited in the summer of 2019, just north of the Flagstaff city limits. And today we're going to be talking about how a geologist sees the burn scars, including some of the concerns that we have. The first of those being that the museum fire burned on really steep slopes. And two, a lot of those steep slopes were burned at moderate or high burn severity, which increases the potential for erosion and runoff significantly on those slopes. And thirdly, we're really concerned about what that runoff and erosion could mean for flood and debris flow potential in the to the public and infrastructure. So unfortunately, the Museum Fire watershed, which is highlighted in blue, drains directly into neighborhoods and businesses in Flagstaff. So that makes this fire really concerning because there's a lot of people at risk of being impacted by floods and debris flows. And over here on the left, I have some of the flood mitigation things that have been done, including sandbags and these big Jersey barriers with sandbags on top of them to try and prevent people's homes from being flooded by the floodwaters. And another concern we have is that there is critical infrastructure within the burn scar. So highlighted in this orangish, yellowish line is Eldon Lookout Road. And that is the only road that leads up to the communication towers on Eldon Mountain, which provides all the communications for like Flagstaff emergency dispatch, the radio, critical these days, and things like that. So the museum fire flooding could potentially knock out this road in places, especially like areas right here where the road is literally just plastered onto the side of the mountain. And if we were to lose the road in this type of location, it would be very, very difficult to repair. And now I'm going to go over a couple of the mitigation efforts that we have on the burn scar, as well as in town, to reduce the impacts of flooding and debris flows to the community and infrastructure. So first we have in the upper right, we have these articulating concrete block mats that were in place at critical drainage crossings. So the hill slope goes way up here on the right-hand side and then goes down here on the left-hand side. And these block mats, along with these cable barriers, were put in place to prevent the road from scouring out, basically disappearing from the hillside. And here's a close-up of what those cable barriers look like. And those are in place to catch like big logs or big rocks coming down so they don't hit directly on the road and carve it out. And also right after the fire, aerial mulch was applied. So basically mulch is just, in this sense, a giant wood shred. So the Forest Service took ponderosa pine logs that were in the area that were already cut, shredded them up, and the shred pieces are about this long. And then they dropped them using a helicopter onto the burn scar, and that was done to try and increase the surface roughness of the landscape, which slows water down when it's going downhill, and also to decrease raindrop impacts. You wouldn't really think that a raindrop has a lot of impact on the soil, but when there's nothing there, no trees, no vegetation, no nothing, millions and millions of raindrop impacts can erode that soil surface. And then down in between the burn scar in the neighborhoods, a lot of the culvert crossings, or underpasses, I guess, along the road were upgraded from these flimsy, almost non-existent culverts to these upgraded sized ones to try and convey the water down the floodplain rather than backing it up behind the road and carving out the road. Then within town, once again, we have the sandbags and Jersey barriers. We have these stream bollards that were placed upstream of culverts, and those were used to prevent any logs from getting in that culvert and then jamming it and then basically making the culvert unusable. And we also have these things called cross vein weirs, which is basically where large basalt boulders were taken and they were kind of made to create a waterfall effect, which you can see here. And that really slows down stream flow and allows it to have more time to infiltrate into the soil, as well as protecting it from incising into the landscape, because there are gas pipes and communication lines underneath this section. So we don't want to lose those. All right, so now moving into most of the work that I did, I was in charge of looking at how the geomorphology of the burn scar is changing over time. And geomorphology just means study of the landscape. So we had 3 main study basins, which are highlighted in black here and labeled. And we were trying to look at, do the basins that have mulch in it, which are these tan polygons, versus the basins that don't have any mulch in it, like 102 on the left, do they respond differently to erosion? Like, did the mulch have any effect on decreasing erosion on the hill slopes? So that was one of the things we were looking at. And our overall goals of the research was, 1, to understand the present flooding hazard and how that's changing over time, to document any debris flows and the conditions that led up to those debris flows occurring. The third thing was to look at any channel impacts, like did the channels get scoured out, like we see right here on the right-hand side. And like I said, to look at the effectiveness of the mulch treatment, and also to document any damage that occurred to the roads from any flooding or debris flow events. And this photo on the right is really impressive because I've highlighted in this yellow square mud marks up on the tree. So the mud got pretty high coming through here, and the tree lost a lot of its bark from these debris flows coming down these channels. You would not want to be here when this was happening. You'd be dead. So quickly, I'm going to go over some of the methods that we used to assess these different goals. So first, we were looking at how the soil is recovering over time, and I'll refer to that as soil hydrology. And we used this little cylinder looking thing called a mini disc infiltrometer. And basically we would fill this up with water, and we would get our notebooks out and we would record how fast the water was infiltrating into the soil. This could be very tedious because sometimes you'd get like 1 milliliter of infiltration in like 5 minutes, which is like an eternity when you're laying on the ground. And we would do this every monitoring season, which was fall 2019, spring 2020, fall 2020, spring 2021, and fall 2021. See, and the other thing, or another thing that we looked at was, was how the surface was changing in terms of what was present. So was there vegetation present on the landscape, which we measured in these little boxes here? Was there litter, like pine needles or pine cones? Was there ash, or was there mulch treatment? Things like that. And we wanted to see how that was changing over time, because as we know, vegetation is really important for stabilizing the post-fire landscape. And the last 2 things we were looking at was hill slope rilling. So this here, these 2 parallel lines, those are rills. And basically what those indicate is significant hill slope erosion. So we wanted to monitor those things and see, okay, are we getting more rills over time? Are we getting less? Are they getting deeper, longer, wider? All of which would indicate that the hill slopes are eroding more. And we did a similar thing monitoring little channels on the hill slopes. and seeing how those changed over time, if they were deepening, widening, so on and so forth. Oh, very last thing, the cool thing, is we had seismic monitoring stations throughout the burn scar, and these basically captured the energy of any debris flows coming down the slopes. So what that allowed us to do is find the exact timing of when debris flows happened on the landscape, and a debris flow signal looks like this. So right here, we actually had 2 back-to-back debris flows. Super cool. Okay, so I've broken up my results into 2 different sections. First, we're going to look at the flood and debris flow response, and then we're going to look at what happened at our monitoring locations. So first with the 2019 monsoon, AKA a non-soon. So this was the year of the fire, and at the time, 2019 was the driest monsoon in Flagstaff recorded history. So therefore, we didn't really have too many debris flow events happening. But the ones that did happen, we were able to capture with our seismic monitoring. And this is what one of those debris flow events looked like. So it was pretty impressive. This is a lot of energy. If you were standing next to the channel that this occurred in, the ground would probably be shaking a little bit. And we also documented what the aftermath of that debris flow looked like. So here we can see where rocks and trees and all sorts of stuff came down and pounded these trees and took their bark off and took some of the trees down the channel with it. And it cut into the channel bed pretty deeply. So you can see that here as well. And if you're ever in Flagstaff, this is near the Upper Oldham Trail. You can go see this stuff. So that was it for 2019, kind of lame. But then we moved to 2020, and it's even more lame because this monsoon was even drier than the previous year. We didn't really think that would happen, but it did. So we only recorded 1 debris flow event during this time, and I have that here on our seismograph. And what was interesting about this event is that it had a pretty low rainfall intensity, meaning that it didn't take a lot of rainfall to initiate these debris flows. Essentially, the rainstorm that produced this debris flow was a 1 to 2 year event, which means that this type of rain event has 100% to 50% chance of occurring any day of the year. So a very common type of storm. So that was pretty alarming that such a small event, small common event, was able to produce debris flows in the burn scar. And here's some of the damage that it did to the road. And although it looks pretty bad, this is relatively minimal damage to the road. And you'll see some more significant stuff later in this presentation. All right, the good stuff. So we had multiple events this year. You probably heard about it all on the news. It was incredible and really fun from a geologist perspective. So the first storm that we had was a less common type of rainstorm. This one has a 25-year recurrence interval, which means any given year it has about a 4% chance of occurring. So a little more rare than the other one, but not anything crazy and out of the norm. And this event produced lots of debris flows throughout the burnt scar. And we have some of the damage that it did to the road here. The road is going diagonally through the picture, and I've labeled it there. And the channel comes in from the right. And these are pretty massive boulders that it deposited on the road. And this is only one location. The damage along the road was pretty incredible, but the Forest Service was able to get out there, repair everything, get everything cleared off really quickly. So we considered that moderate damage to the road. The road was not lost in any place. Then further downstream in town, we had high water marks or high flows coming through the neighborhoods. And you can see the watermarks on these Jersey barriers here with homes in the background. And the floodwaters overcame the channel at one point and then spread out through the neighborhoods. We see some sandbags doing somewhat of a good job here. Fun fact, this is the parking lot of my old apartment, right before I moved to Tucson, which I moved in the nick of time. All right, so that was July 13th. July 14th, the very next day, we had another rainfall event that produced debris flows. But what is interesting about this event is that it produced similar magnitude debris flows, but with significantly less rainfall. This is one of those really common rain events that produced this. And here is that same location as here. And we can see that it produced similar sized boulders. This time it gave us a treat, brought down a log, which is kind of cool. And we found this really interesting because we're like, wait, the day before it took a much larger rain event to produce the same type of debris flow as the following day. And here we have some of the road damage higher up on the mountain. We can see that this cable barrier, it's caught a bunch of big rocks, but it took a beating in the process. But what's important to note here is that there's a concrete block mat underneath all this debris, and the road is still there. So we consider that a success. Yay, it wasn't taken off the mountain. And here's just a neat photo of somebody having fun in the floodwaters downstream. Right? Then 2 days later, because Flagstaff hadn't had enough rain, we had another event, and this was a back-to-back event. And we can see that on our rainfall plot here, where we have 2 peaks, and also on our seismograph, where we have 2 peaks. So these are 2 separate debris flow events. And both of these events were very similar and are 2 to 5 year events. So they have a 50 to 20% chance of occurring in a year. And these also produced debris flows. So we have photos from some of our game cameras out there, and this is the floodwaters coming across the road. The road goes left to right in these photos. So you can see how it just scours the thing out. Thankfully, at this location, we were on the floodplain. We're not on the road sticking to the side of the mountain location. So this section was repaired pretty quickly. But it's impressive the amount of damage that floods could do. My favorite one. This was the biggest event all summer, saved the best for last. And this was a somewhat more rare event. It's a 25 to 50 year event. And this caused widespread debris flows and flooding within the burn scar and downstream. And we were able to go out there and measure some of the volumes on these debris flows. And the largest one we measured had a volume of 3,000 cubic meters. So in terms of feet, rough math, multiply it by 3, about 9,000 cubic feet worth of sediment. And I have my field partner right here for scale. And this debris flow lobe came through and it like buried trees, it buried the trail. Just incredible, super cool. And over here we have another debris flow that we took a volume on, and it had a volume of 1,300 cubic meters. And this is the one I first saw, and I thought, wow, this is really cool. And then when I saw this one, I was like, wow, this is really cool. Oh, let's see if this video plays. This is just one of the streams that had a debris flow during that event. And if I get it to play, it's really cool. Yes. Let's see. I'm going to play it 2 times. And if I can get it to work right, I'm going to pause it. So yes, it worked. We can see this big old boulder coming down. And this thing is probably about 5 feet across, 4.5, 5 feet. So that's pretty impressive of what this small drainage could bring down. And this was just one of the ones that brought down sediment. So really impressive that we caught this on camera. And it even splashes up some sediment onto our camera lens, and we had to move our camera. We thought it was in a safe spot, on a high tree, on a far bank. It was not safe. The tree barely made it. So pretty incredible. Yep. And in terms of road damage, this storm caused the most significant damage. Here we have the 2 culverts that I pictured at the beginning of the presentation. They were completely buried. My sediment had to be excavated out. And then further up where the road is plastered onto the side, and we have these concrete block mats, the flow, came from the right-hand side, went over the road, and actually started to carve out underneath this concrete block mat. So it created kind of a precarious situation. Would you stop doing that? Yeah. Where this block mat is now undercut. Now, if this mat was not here in the first place, I'm convinced that the road would have been gone here. So the treatment did its job. It saved the road. Now we're going to look at what we saw at our monitoring sites. So we saw a really interesting pattern with our soil hydrology. That's what we measured with that cylinder in the water. For each spring that we were out there, we saw an increase in what we call saturated hydraulic conductivity. I'm just going to call it KSAT because it's a mouthful. And basically that's a measure of how well the soil can absorb water. So we saw increases in the spring. We were like, yay, that's awesome. But each fall we saw a decrease. Some of our ideas as to why that might be happening is that over winter, there's snow on Mount Eldon, and that snow can actually act to break up the soil surface through freezing and thawing. And that can break up that hydrophobic layer that's at the top of the soils, the layer that won't allow water to infiltrate. And then we think potentially the reason why we're seeing a decrease in the fall is that the fine particles like the ash, silt clay that's laying on the landscape, it gets moved around by wind and water during the summer. Well, maybe not in 2020, but this year it did. And then fills in those little cracks that the snow created during the winter. So it fills that in and kind of seals it off again. That's our working hypothesis on that. But an important thing to note is that over time, we're slowly marching upwards to returning to what an unburned soil would look like. So this is the goal, is getting to this on the far right-hand side. Because these soils can absorb a lot more water, which would mean less runoff, less floods, less debris flows. And here's an example of what that hydrophobic soil layer does. So this is a water droplet, it adds a couple droplets that are just sitting on top of that layer. They're not going anywhere. It's as if you would have dropped water on asphalt. That's not good, because when you have millions and millions of raindrops falling on the surface and they're all doing this, they have to go somewhere, and that's downstream. Now we have how the surface was changing in terms of vegetation, litter, ash, stuff like that. So the important thing to note here is that prior to fall 2021, so prior to the monsoon this year, we didn't see a lot changing on the landscape, minus some more litter. Litter's great, but we want vegetation. Well, we finally got that this year because we finally had some rain. So we saw that in the form of annual vegetation coming back, like little weed stuff, and also in the form of trees, like these little aspens that I've pictured up here. And also really important to note is that the amount of mulch, that stuff that was dropped from the helicopters at the very beginning, is decreasing over time. So that makes it a lot harder to analyze whether it's having an impact on decreasing surface erosion, because it's being stripped away by wind, what little rain we had in 2020, it's decomposing, and essentially it can't really do its job as well. And this is at another one of our sites, and we saw a big increase in vegetation, pictured here. Okay, now moving on to our rilling sites. So this was really interesting to us. So we saw a decrease in rills in 2020. No surprise, there wasn't really any rainfall to perpetuate these rills on the landscape. So over time, they were filling in by wind, bringing in fine particles, through mulch settling in, bioturbation, all sorts of things like that. But when we actually had some rain this past year, we saw a significant increase in rilling, almost back up to what we recorded the very first year. So essentially, that means that we're seeing significant runoff on the hill slopes that is causing this rilling. And additionally, we saw a slight increase in the rill width, like how wide they are. We saw a significant increase in their length, which we can see here, but their depth remained about the same. So what does all this mean? With the increased number of rills, increased width, length, it just means that we're seeing increased hill slope erosion. And here I've pictured some really beautiful rills that we saw this fall. And I've highlighted them, or a few of them, with these yellow lines. And it's kind of creating like a zebra pattern on the landscape. And it's really neat to see, but it tells you that there's a lot of erosion going on. And when you get millions of these together, that's a lot of sediment coming off the hill slopes. And lastly, at our channel monitoring sites in 2020, no surprise, nothing changed. They remained the same, no rain. But in 2021, we saw a deepening of the fall leg, which is the deepest part of the channel, and I've highlighted that with these arrows. And we also saw an increase in gullying. So that's where these points come in. So basically, these are smaller side channels, I guess you could call it, coming in to the main channel. And here's kind of what that looks like. On the left, we have before monsoon, and here we have after this year's monsoon. So in the after photos, you can see how a lot of that mulch has been removed, a lot of the soil's been removed. There's a lot of bare rock exposed. And here is one of those gullies that's coming in. So this is just cut into the channel bank and just eroded quite a bit of material away. And when you get a lot of those together, it's bad news. Same deal at one of our untreated sites, increasing the depth of the channel and increasing the depth of these gullies. So in summary, this research on the museum fire is really unique because we had 2 record dry monsoons right after the fire that normally doesn't happen. And that was followed by a really wet monsoon. And although the museum fire is pretty small when you compare it to like the mega fires that happen in California or like the Wallow fire that happened here in Arizona, this fire has a lot of consequences because it drains right into the neighborhoods and businesses. And the study is also really unique because we have all this monitoring prior to the big flooding events happening. So that's pretty rare. Normally you get out there after the flooding's happened. And for the future, there's still instability within the burn scar because our soils have not yet recovered and the vegetation is still recovering. This is really the only, well, 2021 was really the only year that we had significant vegetation growth. And the last little bit that I'll say is that studying this fire is adding to our understanding on how burn scars in the Southwest in general recover over time and how it relates to flood and debris flow risk. So with that, I will take questions.
How did the fire begin? Was it human caused?
So the question was, how did the fire begin? It was human caused, unfortunately. Yes.
Is the study going to continue in time?
Yes. So the question was, is the study going to continue in time? Yes, we're at least going out this spring and we're working on getting more funding to go out next fall and at least the next year after that, so 2023. Because we really want to see what this fire is doing. Normally, we have a couple other fire sites that we look at and we study them for about 5 years. But with the museum, nothing happened until we call this year 3. Year 1 being the year of the fire. So we want to study it as long as we can, especially while it's still producing the floods and debris flows. Yes.
Someone asked, using the KSAT measurement trend, how long to get back to unburned?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And that's something we're actually studying at our other fire sites as well. So that's one of the questions we're trying to answer is how long does it take for the soils to at least get close to what they were prior to the fire?
How long does it take for the mulch to break down that was air dry?
The question was, how long does it take the mulch to decompose after it was airdropped? I don't have a hard answer on that, but let me just go back here. So in this before photo, this was November 2020, and you can see there's still a lot of mulch and it still has that kind of orangish brown wood color. Whereas over here on the right, this was this fall and it's like turning white. It's like pretty easy to crumble apart. So I feel like this last fall, like it showed quite a bit of decomposition. I mean, it's still present, but definitely not in the quantity or quality as it was right after the fire, or even just 1 year after the fire. Yeah. Yes.
Was there any seeding done on the fire as part of the mitigation process?
Question was there any seeding done on the fire after or on the burn after the fire? There was not. We just, or Forest Service just did mulching. Sometimes in the Southwest, the seeding doesn't work as well, just because the monsoon comes in right after fire season. And a lot of times the seed doesn't have enough time to establish and grow. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Even sometimes with the mulch, it works or it doesn't.
And then,
Yeah.
is the rilling, is that evidence of more topsoil erosion, or is that evidence of like an actual catastrophic failure of a total hill slide?
Right, that's a really good question. So the next question was, is the rilling just erosion of the topsoil, or is it erosion and more of like a catastrophic event of like hill slope failure? So it's eroding through the top and sometimes the second soil layer. So mostly just that top stuff. There is landslide risk out here in the burn scar, but the rills don't account for anything like that. It's just on the hill slope, on the surface, the topsoil. Yes, next question.
Do you think the mulch did much or any good in mitigating hill slope erosion or lessening runoff?
Okay. Oh, I guess I don't have to repeat the question because you have the mic. So it was kind of hard to determine that because it had been so long since the mulch was dropped. We were hoping we would have a present monsoon in 2020, which we didn't have. So it became more difficult to assess whether the mulch was having an effect on the hill slope erosion because like we can see here in this photo, it was decreasing over time, decaying, being removed through wind. Some of it had washed off in what little rain events we had in 2019 and 2020. So it became more difficult to assess whether it was actually successful. Next question.
Was this considered a hot fire? Was the soil sterilized? And did you have to do something about that?
So the question was this considered a hot fire and was the soil sterilized? Let's see, I'm gonna scroll back as I'm talking. Sections of the fire did burn really hot and had a significant impact on the soil. I didn't particularly assess that. The burn area emergency response team came in and assessed that, on the burn scar. And I should go to this one. Everywhere on this slide that you see red and orange is where the soil burn severity was high or moderate, which is what we're concerned about in terms of erosion and runoff potential. So quite a bit of it did burn at high and moderate. And in this slide, I highlighted where it burned at those burn severities on steep slopes, which is just extra bad.
Nothing you do about that, is it?
There's really nothing you can do. The mulch was dropped on the right side of the burn scar here in an effort to try to reduce the runoff coming off of those burned slopes. But there's really not much you can do because it's just such a grand scale type of thing.
Did you do any monitoring of groundwater levels in the downhill wells?
Okay. No, we did not. Yes, we didn't. We were focused mostly on the upper hill slopes of the burn scar. Yeah.
How many seismometers in your monitoring network, and could you use seismic signal as early warning systems of approaching debris flow / flash flood?
Yes, so we had the very first year, we had quite a bit of seismometers out there. I can't remember the exact number off the top of my head, but I think it was something like 10. One of the other folks who, Ryan Porter, who's at NAU, he leads the seismic monitoring stuff. He's the guru. And he would have an exact number on that. but we've had them out there every monitoring year, specifically over the monsoon. Let's see, the second part of that question is an early warning system, right? So there's talk of something like that. We actually put out a paper talking about some of the seismic responses we've had from the burn scar, but we haven't gone the extra step to like actually implement an early warning system. But the research that we have done shows that yes, these seismometers do capture the energy from the events coming down, and in the future, maybe for a different fire, I don't know if it'd be put in this one just because it's getting pretty long since the fire occurred. But there is a possibility of something like that being put on other fires. We're not personally looking into doing that, but it's showing that the potential is there. Yes.
Compared to other monitoring sites on different fires, how does this compare to your guys' survey? As far as debris runoff and impact?
Okay, yeah, so the question was, compared to our other monitoring sites, how does the debris flow response from the museum compare? It's pretty up there. Like, we've seen some pretty cool stuff coming off these slopes. We have several sites in New Mexico and several in Arizona as well. And I think the debris flows are comparable to what we see at those sites as well. The Woodbury fire maybe being the exception. Those are pretty big. Any other questions? Yes.
Given the state of the burn watershed and the slow process of recovery, what else can be done to lessen flood risks to downstream communities?
So I know there's some work that the county and city is doing to lessen the impacts, especially like in the neighborhoods and businesses. But the best thing to do is to be aware and to basically like protect your property, put up the sandbags, put up the Jersey barriers, which those are still out there throughout the burn scar. Don't take them down. When I was living in the floodplain during 2020, you know, a lot of folks were like, well, like we haven't really seen any flooding happening. And I was like, don't take the sandbags down yet. I know they're the worst and they're really annoying, but don't take them down yet because you never know when that storm's going to come through. So yeah, basically just staying aware and trying to basically defend your property with sandbags and stuff. Yeah.
Just kind of more comments. It says, in addition to the seismic devices, there's a network of remote rainfall gauges installed in this area that provide real-time data for emergency alerts.
Yes. Yeah, we actually work alongside J.E. Fuller, who operate those. They're one of our co-contributors on this. So, and that's the rainfall gauges paired with the seismometers is actually how we're able to look at what the initiating rainfall conditions were for the different debris flow events.
And then one more comment says, tonight's paper says neighborhood sirens have been funded to warn people of imminent flooding.
Yes, that's some of the work the county has been doing. Yeah. And those will be based off the rainfall gauges. Once they reach a certain threshold, they send the signal and alert folks. Any other questions? Yeah.
Do you see a significant amount of erosion in the spring thaw with the snowpack that comes down?
Yeah, good question. So the question was, do we see significant erosion in the spring after the snow melt? And no, we really haven't. There's let's see, this past spring, so 2021, we saw a very, very slight, pretty much insignificant increase in rilling. We captured like 2 more rills along a 50-meter transect. But other than the changes to soil hydrology, nothing else really changed. We didn't see a change at the channel heads, not much change at the rill sites. All right, have we had our museum fire fill? All right, cool. All right.
We really appreciate you coming out. That was really interesting. Thank you everyone for coming out. Our next meeting will be February 8th. We have John Fox, a senior petrographer with Prescott Petrographics, talking about his career in petrography, which my understanding is microscopic study of details in rocks and minerals. So it should be really interesting. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
I think there was a lot of thank yous and great talk.
Oh,
Very
awesome.
informative comments.
Cool, awesome. I'm glad. There were a lot of great questions.
So yeah, I can tell people are listening and engaged.
Yeah.